Jesteśmy na Filipinach w zatoce Subic Bay.
We are in the Philippines, in the Subic Bay. On the opposite side of the bay is located area of the former American naval base. Just in 1991, Americans started to withdraw from here the army of almost 20,000 troops, hundreds of aircrafts and several warships. The immediate cause of troops' withdrawal from the naval base territory was the eruption of nearby volcano, Mount Pinatubo, which has threatened life of soldiers. Residues of war in the surroundings of the base are the wrecks of ships and aircrafts, which we will dive. Of course, the main attraction for diving in Subic Bay is a heavy cruiser USS New York wreck sank in 1941. There are several other smaller sunk units and some very interesting aircraft wrecks. We'll dive on the F-4 Phantom jet fighter wreck, which, as rumor has it, the Americans simply throw off from an aircraft carrier. Commonly referred to as the El Capitan, the USS Majaba was built by Albina Engine and Machine Works in 1919 and originally named as the SS Meriden. In April 1942, she was acquired by the US Navy as the El Capitan and immediately renamed USS Majaba. She completed conversion to a miscellaneous auxiliary in May and subsequently steamed to the Hawaiian Islands for cargo runs to islands of Polynesia and the South Pacific Ocean. During World War II, she served with distinction, providing cargo runs for the US military. On her final cargo mission between Tuglai and Guadalcanal, she was struck by a torpedo from a Japanese submarine. The impact destroyed her engine room and boilers, but she did not sink. Due to this damage, she was towed to Florida Islands, Solomons, was repaired and spent the remainder of the war serving as a floating quarters and material storage ship. Following the end of the war, she was towed to the Philippines. Whilst waiting at anchor in Ilanin Bay, Subic, to be returned to her pre-war owner, she was sunk in a storm. It is a rather conventional steam-powered freighter, and her plate rudder design signifies that she was an older design of ship than most freighters used in the Pacific during World War II. The existence of a large gun platform at her bow indicates her participation during the conflict, although the lack of any obvious explosive damage seems to indicate that she did not sink in action. The wreck lies on its port side in a maximum depth of 20 meters, with the starboard side only 4 meters below the surface. She's approximately 3,000 tons, 80 meters long and structurally intact. Divers can enjoy swimming inside her massive forward and rear holds and safe penetration into her boiler room. This combination of good visibility, shallow depth, lack of current and intact structure makes this dive site the one of the best in Subic Bay. The landing craft utility is another post-war amphibious assault wreck. There were many variants of utility landing craft designed and built during World War II. This vessel type was used for transporting personnel or small vehicles onto beaches. The example dive in Subic Bay was actually designated as a landing craft tank. Vessels of this type could be stored and operated from the larger landing ship tank vessels, for which we will dive later. There are several rooms that offer short penetrations towards the rear. It is believed that this wreck was sunk due to accident or storm in one of the most sheltered dive sites, as it is protected from rough water inside Subic Bay, close to the end of the main Subic runway. sank with its large forward ramp still raised, and it lies upright with a maximum depth of 22 meters. This is one of the most popular Subic Bay dive sites. The most popular of the Subic Bay dive sites, the USS New York, is perhaps the most famous wreck dive in the Philippines. It was built in 1891 as the second in a line of armored cruisers with the original designations of ACR-2. Her sister ship ACR-1 was later converted to a battleship and renamed the USS Maine. The sinking of the Maine instigated the Spanish-American War, in which the USS New York also fought. The New York was upgraded, including the turreted 8-inch guns, and became the flagship of the US Asiatic Fleet and Pacific Squadron. She subsequently participated in the First World War and other conflicts. Between 1911 and 1917, she was renamed USS Saratoga and later the USS Rochester. In 1933, she was finally laid up at the Subic Bay to be cannibalized for spares. She was eventually scuttled by the US Navy in 1941 during the preparations to withdraw from Subic to prevent her 4 8-inch guns falling into enemy hands. Resting on her port side at a depth of 30 meters, she is still mostly intact, except for explosive damage caused by salvage operations in her midsection. Fortunately for divers, her 4 massive turreted deck guns and enormous propeller are still intact. The wreck is 110 meters long, making it one of the largest wrecks in the bay. Diving the USS New York is an atmospheric experience for divers, and the scale of the wreck can really be appreciated as you swim alongside her main guns or around her propeller. Unfortunately, during our dives, visibility on the USS New York didn't exceed 3 meters in the upper part of the wreckage, 1 meter at the main guns, and was practically zero close to the bottom around the huge propeller. Located in the same bay as the LCU wreck, this vessel sank during the Japanese occupation of Subic during World War II. The wreck stands upright at a maximum depth of 26 meters and is structurally intact. The exact vessel type and purpose of this trawler-style vessel is not known, but with a length of about 35 meters, a breadth of 7 meters and weighing around 150 tons, she was most likely employed as a tugboat or submarine detection vessel. She sank in 1944 or 1945, most likely because of fire after explosion on board. The wreck is a great dive with average visibility 10 meters. Plenty of marine life is located around the whole wreck. The compartments provide shelter from many schools for juvenile fish and giant pufferfish. Divers can visit some of compartments and, at the lowest level, see a quite big engine. During ascending on the captain's bridge, we can see the residues of steering column with axis, to which was connected the ship's steering wheel. The landing ship tank, LST, was created during World War II for the purpose of supporting amphibious operations by carrying large amounts of vehicles, cargo and personnel directly onto the shore. More than 1,000 vessels of this type were commissioned by the US Navy. The basic design for the LST required a vessel capable of ocean travel, yet with a shallow draft for beaching operations. The ultimate design incorporated a variable ballast system, a length of 100 meters, a 15 meters beam, and minimum draft of 1.2 meter. They could accommodate all types of military vehicles, and later production designs could also house and deploy a landing craft utility or landing craft tank from its main hold. She could transport over 2,100 tons of cargo, men or machines. Her crew complement was 8 to 10 officers and 100 to 115 sailors. This 100-meter long vessel was deliberately scuttled in 1946 and now sits upright in the center of the bay with a maximum depth of 36 meters. Her giant bow doors have dropped away to the seafloor, although her main loading ramp remains raised. Along her front and mid-section, the wreck is intact and contains a football pitch-size vehicle loading deck, which is easy to penetrate at each end. The top decks of her stern section have collapsed structurally, although the tangled wreckage attracts a wealth of marine life and schools of large barracuda. Jacks and fusiliers are common here. An additional attraction for the more advanced divers is the ability to swim through the corridor, along of the one of the sides, for almost the entire length of the ship. The Tabi was a DC-3 Dakota variant, produced under license in Japan pre-war and used extensively at the Second World War. During the Japanese occupation of the Philippines, the Japanese operated Tabi aircraft from numerous locations, including Clark Field near to Subic Bay. There were wartime reports of at least 9 Japanese aircrafts being shot down over Subic. The wreck lies inverted at a maximum depth of 45 meters. The fuselage section is intact, with the side door removed. Inside the aircraft is a great deal of fish life, including a large grouper. Wreck shows fairly strong damage on the cockpit area, but divers can identify the pilot seats and the control sticks. The engines tore away from the aircraft on crashing, and the remains of one engine and the propeller can be located a few meters north of the wreck itself. Unfortunately, the wreck is quite deep, and the time during the interesting dive expired quickly, so after a few minutes we had to ascend. Arizona dive shop in Subic Bay acquired this abandoned 20-meter Chinese fiberglass fishing vessel and had the great idea to create their own house wreck. The shop cleaned up the ship to make it environmentally friendly and then punched holes in the hull, sinking it. Now it rests at 21 meters below the surface, not far offshore from Arizona Dive Resort. The benefit of doing this is that it creates an artificial reef and a great place for divers to do training, night diving and of course wreck diving. Due to the small size and the fact that it's retained intact, wreck is very photogenic. On the bow, the small anchor is still hanging. Inside the wheelhouse, divers can still see the steering wheel. The whole positive image complements the deep green water's color, reminiscent of rather Baltic Sea than South China Sea diving. Poor visibility may be a problem for the less experienced divers. One of the few aircraft wrecks available in Subic Bay, the F-4 Phantom is a relic of the US Navy's long activities at Subic Bay. F-4 Phantom is a supersonic two-seat twin-engine interceptor fighter and bomber that entered US Navy service in 1960, later being adopted also by the US Marines and Air Force, along with several other national air forces. The aircraft served with distinction during the Vietnam War. It was last used operationally during the 1991 Gulf War in an anti-radar and air defense suppression role, before retiring in 1996. The F-4 Phantom was very high technology for its era, fitted with an advanced Doppler radar, impressive payload options, and having an airframe mostly composed of titanium. The wreck lies several kilometers outside of the bay at a depth of 45 meters. Visibility is consistently good, and there is light moderate current. Because it lies beyond the protection of the bay, it cannot be dived in rough or stormy weather. Probably this aircraft wreck was discarded from a carrier ship. J-79 engines are not present. There are no ejection seats and the canopy is missing, allowing divers to see the pilot's cabin. Diving on a F-4 Phantom was the last during our wreck diving adventure in Subic Bay. We saw many interesting wrecks, learned about their amazing stories, and we hope to have better visibility next time.